This is God and Autobiography, the podcast, a dramatic adaptation and continuing discussion of the book God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin. He was a lifelong agnostic, but one day he had an occasion to pray. To his vast surprise, God answered in words. Being a philosopher, he had a lot of questions, and God had a lot to tell him. Episode 214. Welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm Scott Langdon. This is What's on Your Mind, and this is a special one. Jerry and I have 2 emails to talk about, and this week things are a little different. Instead of 2 completely separate emails, these go together. The second is a direct response to the first, like in a thread. And Jerry and I found them both wonderful and fascinating. We're always so grateful to those who write in and share their experiences. If you'd like to share your story of God with us, please drop us an email at questions@godandautobiography.com. Here's what's on your mind. I hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of What's on Your Mind. This is our 31st version of What's on Your Mind. It's one of my favorite things that we do here. I'm with Jerry Martin, and we are reading a couple of emails today. This is the series where Jerry and I take emails from folks who write into the program, and they've been readers of the book or listeners to this program. And the email that we bring you today is a response to the question that we always ask, and that is, if you have an experience with God and you'd like to share it, we'd love to hear it. And so we always invite you to write us at questions@godandautobiography.com and tell us your story about God. And in this case, Jennifer writes with her experience. And Jerry, I just found it fascinating, and I can't wait to share it and talk about it with you.
Yeah, I find all of these emails people's actual experiences. And, and some of them are wonderful experiences, some of them are not. Or some of them are just people writing, well, I have questions. I can't find God, or, something like that. Or I have so much skepticism. Does this even make sense, the search for the divine? But they're all, this is real testimony of the human interaction with the divine, even in the moments of absence. That's part of the interaction. And so I just find them such a gift to all of us to share these experiences so we can. It empowers us in our own experience. It helps us in our own interpretation of our experience to kind of ponder these. And so Jennifer has sent us a wonderful one. And so I'm very pleased to be able to talk about Jennifer's dramatic experience.
Yes, she had quite a dramatic experience, and she writes in and says this. I would like to share my experiences that I have been able to have with God for the last 2.5 years. I've been very sick since I was a baby, and I'm now 38. I was struggling with myself and had given up on living. I prayed to God, and since then I have seen several miracles. I was able to get off my medications that were hindering my mind from being able to have the motivation to feel. Once I got off my medications and started to feel healthier, I was able to see God's eye. I never knew that was something that anyone has ever seen, and still don't know if anyone has. It was amazing. It was about the size of 2 airplanes in the sky, and next to it was an angel. The eye was beautiful. The color of his eye is of the sky with blue and clouds within, and it moved around. I'm not sure if anyone else saw this at the time. I wish I shared this sooner, as some time has passed. I was in Nevada at the time, but I live in Sacramento. The angel was moving in and out of the clouds and then went away. His eye moved around just as you would move your own eye. It was the most amazing thing I have ever seen. God has the whole world in his hands. Since then, I have seen two white doves flying over me as I was reading the Bible outside, which represents my daughter and myself being safe with God after all we've been through. I also got to hear his laughter when I learned how to ride a motorcycle. His laughter is the most joyful laughter you could ever imagine hearing, and I've been able to hear him laugh more than once after that. When I went camping, he also sang to me. I have had a very painful life, full of much sadness, and have had experiences that have caused me to be crippled with emotional and physical problems. I'm able to speak with God, and he is helping me to discover just how strong my connection to him is.
Isn't that amazing? Look at these experiences, and a woman with such trouble, such a troubled life since childhood, sickly, physical problems, emotional problems. How do you cope with all of that? And it helps you cope with all of that if you feel that there's a divine presence that's also part of your life, that you're not alone in all of these struggles. And hers is so remarkable. Well, here's what I wrote to her at the time, just a short note. Thank you for sharing, Jennifer. Your experiences are more anthropomorphic than I am personally comfortable with. There I'm referring to a big I and so forth. This is all extremely anthropomorphic. God has an eye, that kind of thing. But I think if you got to look at these things in context. And then I add, but of course, my experience of hearing a divine voice strains the credibility of others. God has a voice. What? And people start quizzing me sometimes. Oh, what language do you think does God speak? Does God have a native language, you might say? And with what accent and how does it sound and all that kind of thing. Well, somehow these experiences that come forth in extremely concrete and sometimes anthropomorphic ways need to be accepted on their own terms. And you need to draw in, what is this telling me? Not quiz it as if it were a scientific experiment or we have some data on our radar coming in and we're trying to interpret these blips the way they're doing in New Jersey, I guess. What are these things? But no, it's not like that. You need to take in the meaning as it presents itself to you in the experience. And I think she's doing a great job of that. And then I finished my comment to Jennifer, this just brief comment I sent. We all have to be grateful for however God comes to us. So I guess that fits. And I say, bless you, bless you, bless you in general, bless you for sending this communication to us. And if you look back at what she does with the experience, I find it very interesting. At first, I'm kind of startled. God's eye, a big eye in the sky. This is disturbing to me. I live in a kind of common sense world on the whole, though I have a divine voice. And that's also part of my common sense world. Well, she sees a divine eye and describes it. And the eye looks here and there, moves around, whatever that means. And what she gets from that, I'm struck by the radical anthropomorphic image there, a divine eye, but she gets the meaning of it, that the eye was beautiful. And what does she say? Oh God, yeah, here's her culminating comment on what does this mean? God has the whole world in his hands. Now we switch to hands. It's a metaphor, but God is taking in the world. There's a great religious thinker, Nicholas of Cusa, who wrote a piece about that starts with using the image for God of those paintings that I think omnivoyant vision or omnivoyant paintings, the kind of paintings that you occasionally encounter where it seems as if the painting, the eyes in the painting follow you wherever you
Mm-hmm.
move, to the right,
Mm-hmm.
to the left, or across the room, the eyes follow you. And God's kind of
Mm-hmm.
like that, that wherever you're moving, the divine eye, God is continuing to see you. God has continuous vision and is seeing you. And she takes that meaning. So it's, and that's the right thing to do with the experience. Don't worry about anthropomorphism. Does this mean literally an eye? Is the eye bloodshot? Stupid questions like that. And just say, oh, what is this telling me? And I'm struck when she sees the two doves. I think if I saw two doves, I would just, well, here are two doves, maybe a divine sign or something, a divine, how nice,
Mm-hmm.
God sent. But again, she sees the meaning of the two doves, represents my daughter and myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so she just takes that in and she hears divine laughter, joy, so joyful, God singing to me. And I think of sometimes playing music in my head, and why isn't God part of that music in my head? Maybe this is why I'm hearing this music, comes to mind, and I sort of
Mm-hmm.
replay it in my own mind. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and why isn't that God making music in my mind? And I know one scholar who is a great student of all this. There are in the religious traditions people who talk about the odor or fragrance of God, smelling God. Well, I have no idea what that means, but if I had the experience or someone told me in detail about the experience, they probably do know what that means, both what it's like phenomenologically, what it's like as an experience in just experiential terms, but also what did that tell them? It probably told them something, had some meaning for their lives. And part of the meaning, you and I sometimes talk about this, in God and Autobiography, God is both same and other, is everything. God is everything, including is us. And there's God is wall to wall everything, and so God is never absent, obviously. At the same time, God differentiates a God self from ourselves. So we get to live our own lives and drama and so forth. And God has, as the book says, as God in Autobiography describes, as I got in prayer, God telling me, God has a story. God has a story, we have stories, and the two stories are in interaction with each other. God is reacting in large part to us. And of course, we're reacting in large part to God. However, God comes to us in all these many ways. But anyway, those were some of the things that really struck me, Scott, about Jennifer's communication.
I was very struck by it as well. And one of the things, there were a couple of things that struck me straight away. And the first one is your answer that you were uncomfortable with the anthropomorphic language. And I laughed out loud, quite honestly, when I read it, because your first experience with God is this part of your first experience is this multicolored fountain
Ah,
spinning in front of you. And this image, this visual image that accompanied this experience, that was part of the experience. And you look, and Abigail, did you see this? Did you hear this voice? So you have a voice, you have this symbol. And so that struck me. That was amusing to me. And in part, it was amusing because the both of us come out of this American Christianity tradition. And in that tradition, we tell all kinds of stories that are in the Bible of these kinds of experiences happening to the main characters of whatever these stories are. That God comes as a dove, that God, expresses God's self in a burning bush. And we're like, oh, of course, God would do that then, but not now. And we understand when we look at history and enlightenment and science and all of those things, but we've gotten to such a place where it's either science or faith, which is so broad, and those two words, I don't even like using those words together like that because it's not accurate. But the idea of it's either science or religion, I guess it's a more accurate way to kind of talk about the division, is I just don't understand why we have this way of seeing it. It's either or, which just blocks off the possibility of any of these experiences of God. The first thing we want to do, it seems, with something like this experience that Jennifer has, is what we want to do maybe one of two things. Either, she's there's something about her mental health that she's seeing things, or she's not normal in some way. Or the other way would be to sort of put a scientific explanation on it, and try to figure it out scientifically. So, for example, like a National Geographic episode on TV where they're trying to give scientific examples of the plagues that happened in Egypt. Oh, well, it wasn't really frogs. It was actually this, they want to get it scientifically, which I don't have a problem with that. Talk about how it happened, talk about what's going on. But the either or of it doesn't seem to be necessary. In fact, it seems to get in the way of a greater understanding.
Yeah, you can't understand the story after that. The parting of the Red Sea, they do this. There are times of the year where the passage we imagine was Moses' path is the waters are lower, the winds come and push, Well, that's not the meaning of the story. The story isn't about that. That luckily it was the right time of year. That could be a story, but that's not the story. And it's not the meaning of the story. And I think you're exactly right, Scott. Uh, People use science in the singular. There are sciences, and they're not
Mm.
all physics. Biology is not physics, has not been reduced to physics, although only philosophers and specialists in biology realize this. And there's geology, historical geology, paleontology, all these things that aren't just matter in motion. And then everything else we do, deciphering ancient texts, figuring out cuneiform. You start with something that looks like scribbles on a tablet, you finally figure out what it means. Well, that's a kind of science, but it's not reductive. Uh, and Abigail and I were just talking about what does the scientist do? The scientist who may believe science is the only story that's real about the universe, but he himself walks to the office, goes in, puts on his clothes, showers, goes in the office, flips on the light, goes, looks at the screen to see what the data are coming in on whatever experiment is being run, and then thinks, oh, I've got to write a report. And so he starts making notes on a piece of a yellow pad. And so lives in a total world of colors. According to science, there are no colors. Colors are just waves, certain waves, but in fact, we experience colors. And the scientists, the materialists, call this the hard problem.
Mm.
The problem is we're actually conscious, and we have these vivid experiences of color, shape, texture, taste. Something tastes bitter, for example. Well, science translates all of those into quantitative things where the actual experience is lost. And yet, the one thing we actually know firsthand, absolutely to be true, is this is bitter, that it has a taste. So we need to open up our notion of experience. And the experience includes these outer reaches. You're listening to uh, Handel's Messiah or something. That's an experience. That's data, you might say. The data about the nature of the world. The world contains these ele- uh, elements, some natural, some humanly created, things that are of, you might say, divine beauty, just extraordinary beauty. And if you just reduce everything to, as you were saying, Scott, to some, oh, we got to explain it this way and explain it that way. Why do we love this beautiful music? Well, what does it trigger? Neurologists can give you some theory of that. Uh, well, that's an impoverished and inadequate. The main problem is it's an inadequate representation of what our experience is. And our experience is actually our first order encounter with the world. And so it's an inadequate account of what reality contains. And when you then take in, let yourself broaden your notion of experience so you can now take in, that it's richer, deeper, has meanings all sewn through it. Then you can learn something more about reality than these reductive things that take most of the reality out because people are wedded to a particular theory of reality. No, let your experience tell the tale and not some preconceived theory of everything. But let your experience keep informing you. And you mentioned, Scott, the burning bush. When I prayed about that, God said, well, I had to do something to get his attention. At this point, Moses has escaped because he killed a guy. A guy was beating up on a Jew, one of the Jewish slaves, and he killed him. And then, he's a murderer, even though he's Prince of Egypt, has to run away. And he's working as a shepherd for a guy who's Jethro. And anyway, he's just out being a shepherd. Nothing. He's not on a quest or looking for mystical visions or anything. But then God told me in prayer, well, I had to do something to get his attention. So a burning bush, well, that's something, a bush of flame and yet not consumed, as the text says. And then what did Moses do? Moses turned to look. And that's why you and I, Scott, often say you've got to pay attention. Well, Jennifer is certainly someone paying attention. And you got to turn and look, but also you've got to open your heart and mind to taking it in, which is what Moses did and what Jennifer did and what we all need to do. Okay, here's an experience telling me something. What is it telling me? I've got to take that in. And the striking thing is we often kind of know what it's telling us. It comes through to us as part of the experience, what it's telling us, what kind of guidance it's giving. And of course, Moses goes on from there, Jennifer goes on from there, and that's what we all need to be doing.
This week we have a second email, but it's a little bit different than the way we usually do things. And usually we'll have two separate emails and we talk about them separately. But this email is actually a response to Jennifer's email. And so it's a thread in a sense. So Jennifer's email that we read, you responded with the response you just read. And then underneath that, Jona writes in. And Jona says this: hi, sometimes I was wondering if I can ever experience that, just like how you experienced it. I feel so empty. Just those words in a response. And I have some thoughts about a lot of this, but one of the thoughts right off the top of my head is that Jennifer had this nudge to share her experience of God. And to follow that nudge and share her experience on the website like this, via this email, then to have you respond in the way you responded. And then there's some kind of nudge that gets to Jona as a response to Jennifer's email. So it's like God nudges Jennifer, who's nudging Jona, who's nudged me now, because I've read Jona's email and my heart goes out to Jona. And I wonder, boy, I felt that way before, Jona. I feel like that. I feel like I can say, I have my version of what that must feel like. And so that tugged on my life, and I wrote a little bit about it, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm talking to you about it, and I prayed to God about it. And so there's this sort of string of events that have happened because And who knows where it started, but we're going to say, for our purposes, it starts with Jennifer's little nudge. And now look at this string of things that have happened. And so, Jonah, when you say, sometimes I wonder if I can ever experience that, like you, just how you experienced it, Jonah says, I feel so empty. Jonah says, I feel so empty because I haven't experienced it the way you've experienced it, or the way I think you've experienced it. A very interesting email, I thought.
Well, I thought it's wonderful because she's got nothing vivid experientially to share with us. What is your experience of God? I think is the title these things go under our webpage. Anybody can go look and see what the various experiences are. But some of them are like Jonah's. I feel so empty. I
Mm-hmm.
had no such experience, nothing like that. And so it's an expression that's part of the spiritual life. It's not like a failure. And maybe Jonah senses that. Jonah's reporting it as if it's a failure on Jonah's part. Um, that I can't somehow bring about that experience. I can't put myself in a position to somehow have that experience. And as a result, I feel so empty. And a standard part of the spiritual life is moments of divine absence, moments where you feel, oh God, God, even if you've got a lively relationship, I need you here now. And yet, somehow in the mode you're seeking God's presence, God isn't available. Or maybe you're not making God available. Maybe you're in such despair that your own walls are kind of closed off. The door is closed to divine entrance or divine awareness. Uh, who knows? Who knows? But one mistake I've encountered, I think it's a mistake on people writing, is they often latch on a particular type of experience. They sometimes say this about my God voice. I wish God would talk to me. Or they say it about her very vivid visual experiences, mainly. Um, and they think if I don't have that, I've got nothing. My comment to Jonah at the time that I posted is Jonah, the divine appears in many forms and places and is not always easy to recognize. It can be in a beautiful spring day or a kindness from a friend, a remark even by a stranger that somehow carries a message for you, a task put in your path that God wants you to attend to, the voice of conscience. And you will find many other examples in God and Autobiography. It comes up repeatedly in this form or that form. So there's never a complete list, but God often says, I come to people in all these different ways. So there's not one way that's privileged or the primo way or that everyone has to seek. And I often tell people in those contexts, just relax and let God come to you howsoever God comes to you. And I go on in that original comment to Jonah because I thought, well, a lot of people have this problem, so let's discuss it. It is rare for God to speak. I was taking my example as one that she doesn't have. It is rare for God to speak, especially at such length as God did with me. I think it was because God wanted to tell the world some things and wanted me to publish what he told me in a book. So talking was very helpful for that. But for her and others, I have two suggestions. The first works for some people, the second for others. The first is just to sit or meditate, be very still, hearing only your own breath, and let your soul draw in, as if from the surrounding air, the divine presence. Then be still and sit with God for a goodly period of time. So that's the first. The second is to write down thoughts, your daily experience, challenges, pains, decisions you face, as if you were writing a letter or email to God. And then write down whatever comes to you, as if God were answering. Even if it seems like only your own words, there may be a divine whisper therein. And since God is available, is aware of your prayer, is available in that moment of meditation, okay, take God in this kind of general form of the divine surround, you might say, and take it into yourself. And then the second, let God know how it is with you. The only bad prayer is a dishonest prayer. If you're mad at God, tell God you're mad. If you can't hear God and are frustrated, tell God, hey, I'm frustrated, the way Jonah is frustrated. Why don't you show yourself to me? I feel so empty. Can't you help with that? You could say that in your letter to God, and then just see what comes to you. And it may be your own thoughts, but it may be your own thoughts plus, and uh, and it has a very good chance of being your own thoughts plus, since what is the instrument for divine reception? Well, it's you, and
Mhm,
your
mhm.
whole body, your whole life, and particularly your mind in these thoughtful moments.
We're always searching for our path. We're looking for this way to go, you know, and it seems like, I mean, I don't know Jonah's story entirely, but one of the things I can relate to, or at least I, it made me think about my own life that Jonah seems to be living in this understanding exclusively that God is a personal God, but is separate from us and can sometimes be away from us and can sometimes be here. And so I don't hear God because God is somewhere else and I'm here alone. And that's a very common Western way of seeing the world. And we've talked about how that was very crippling for me, as it turned out. I didn't realize just how crippling. And while that, in one sense, as we've talked at length about this, and our work is about this, in one sense, that is true, that God, in a sense, stands apart from us as an other in a relationship. At the same time, this other way of thinking about God as everything opens up an infinite number of possibilities for how God is actually responding to us, but we're closed off to. So, for example, if I'm looking for God to respond in a specific way with a specific voice, as an angel that looks like what we have seen angels look like with wings, and I have this preconceived idea of how God is going to show up. And that is one thing that is other than me. But if I switch that around and think, instead of God being, just one thing that's here or not here, what if God were, in fact, everything that I encounter? So then the possibility of where that answer might come from might be in the person of my wife or my dog coming to give me comfort when I'm feeling really alone. Or it could be, and this happened to me the other day. I was driving for Lyft, which is a part-time job I sometimes do. But when I don't have to do it, quote unquote, then I tend to try not to. I don't really like it. One of the reasons is that there are strangers in my car,
Yeah,
which, as an introvert, that's tough to do. But I do it because of several different reasons, but one of which is I enjoy helping people get to work or wherever. But this one particular ride came up and I wasn't going to go out and do it. And I just felt this nudge, like I needed to just do this one ride. I don't know how to explain the feeling where it came from, but I do know that it's one that I recognize this feeling as a nudge. And I thought, okay. So I drove all the way to pick up this woman, take her all the way to work. And the conversation that we had and how grateful she was that I didn't think anybody was going to be able to pick me up and I didn't know. And she felt lost and I was the answer in that particular situation. And I didn't make a ton of money on it, hardly at all. But for some reason, I felt like I needed to take this ride. So that particular situation ended up pulling me out of a sort of depressive situation I was in, feeling bad about this time of year, about some other things. And I got this notion to And so it turned out to be this opportunity to serve someone else. And then I realized my anxiety and my frustration had gone away because I had gone into this act of service. And I didn't realize it until the reflection later that that was an answer. But I wouldn't have heard it as God's answer if I had been looking for my one particular way that God would respond to me. Hey, God, talk to me. Oh, you're not talking to me. You're not even there. If I close that off, I close off every possibility of having an experience. Coming back to the beginning of our conversation, it's the experience of the doing of a life, the experience of taking this woman, and she was grateful and we had this connection. I'll probably never see her again in our existence on this planet. That was the one moment we had, and maybe that was everything.
Yeah, yeah, that's a wonderful story, Scott, and many reminders in that. Um, we often have nudges, and the voice of conscience is, the symbolization of the little devil on the shoulder. It's kind of
Right.
perfect because it's as if something's whispering to us, "Hey, uh, they left this money out here on the counter. You can grab it."
Mm,
And then sometimes in version, there's a little angel on the other shoulder. No, no, don't do that. But
hmm
and which one are you going to listen to? But life, we do have a lot of nudges, and they're often nudges to move forward into something. And part of what you have to do is you got to pay attention. As we were saying, you paid attention to that nudge. It'd be extremely easy just to dismiss it. Yeah, I don't want to go today. So who cares what this other nudge is? Don't want to do it. But you also, this is one of the lessons I took from Jennifer's communication. You also have to trust it.
mm
You need to trust experience. It can't teach you anything if you don't trust it. You have to trust it at least provisionally. Maybe, you always trust only, it's not blind trust. You trust with your eyes open, with your sensors active,
mm
with your intelligence and your uh, sensitivity, your moral sensitivity, your aesthetic, interpersonal sensitivity, with all these sensors that we have active. But meanwhile, you trust it because that's the only way you can find out what it has to teach you. And there are many experiences that we all have that teach us things. And you understood the experience as a kind of divine nudge, at least in retrospect. Uh, and it made you feel better because often we're in a depression because we're only absorbed in ourselves. That's one of the traits of a depression. You get very
hmm
self-absorbed, and there's no way to climb out of that if you're totally trapped in the self-absorption. And it was very interesting. Why not go, okay, I'm miserable, but maybe I can go do something for somebody else. I'll be just as miserable, you think, but no more miserable if I just go help someone else. And in fact, the very act of helping someone brings more of you alive into the scene. And it's a help to them and a healing for oneself.
mm
And I also wanted to add one other thought. Sometimes people say, "Oh, what does God or the divine have to do with any of that? This is just psychology." You could say, what Scott did, psychology accounts for that. Well, okay. you know, from our point of view, well, that's also God working,
hmm
through good psychotherapy or whatever it might be, or just self therapy.
mm
You're still acting in concert with the divine. And so you don't have to have the emphasis in God and Autobiography, or I think in our discussion, Scott, is never you've got to believe X, Y, Z.
hmm
No, it's much more. There's nothing you have to believe. You have to be open and you have to be discerning. We talk about spiritual discernment a lot. You have to figure out, what does this experience mean? And you have to be trusting, because you have to be willing to go with the experience far enough for it to teach you all it has to teach you.
hmm
And whether you call it God or divine, well, that's up to you, you might say. We're not insisting on that point. But from our point of view, and the view of the world one gets from God and Autobiography, well, it's all God. So you don't need to worry over that question. Someone sends you a nice Christmas card, someone you haven't heard from a long time. Well, is that God or not God? Who cares? It's part of God's world, right? It's
Mm.
part of God's world, and nice to hear from them. And so,
Mm.
Merry Christmas.
Mhm. Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, the exercise that I have done in the past during um, Lent, which is the season that precedes Easter, and I'm going to do it again this year and pay a little bit more specific attention to it, is that during the time of Lent, I would substitute the word love for the word God in
Mhm.
my conversation, in my journaling, in my prayers, and in my writing. And I've been reflecting on that some more lately in this particular season of Advent, for those who participate in the Christian calendar or know of that. And it is always something that is incredibly refreshing to do, that to say love, because that's the direction that we're moving in. When we talk about, for me, when we talk about discerning and what is God's voice, and so ultimately is this moving in the direction of love? Is this moving, even if it's a difficult thing and there might be tension and there's some friction? God talks about there's got to be this friction sometimes. Even so, is this the direction of love I'm moving in? And you you have the experience, and we are asked to draw on and examine experience, because that's what we're dealing with. So one of the things that happened to me when I was running quite extensively, a few years ago, and training for a marathon, was that I had what they end up what we call runner's high, where I
Right.
was on about mile 7 of a lengthy run. And I remember it was mile 7 because I happened to look kind of down at my watch and I knew exactly where I was along this path. And I felt like my legs weren't even moving, like I was in a carriage. That was the image I had, that I was in a carriage being drawn by horses. And I was just that feeling of looking around as the very slowly, so it wasn't like a car going, but it was just this easy carriage. And I was seeing nature and hearing nature and seeing all the beautiful things, and I was just moving along. I was running, but I didn't feel like it. Runner's high. And then I read some articles about it. Had some people say, "Oh, well, what's happening is this chemical in your brain, and you're this left side and the right side." And it kind of befuddled me a little bit, but I was interested in the experience. And then when Judy Dornstreich, one of our guests, she's been a guest a couple of times on the Life Wisdom Project, she talks about our body, mind, heart as our equipment. And I love that term, because then it was like, yes, please tell me what's happening with my equipment. It's the brains happening and the thing and dehydration. That's great. Tell me what's happening with the equipment. The experience I'm having is, nature, bliss, God, grateful. Oh, this beauty. I'm healthy. I feel strong. Like that's the experience. And why that experience? Why that one? Well, it seems to be the one that is at the center of it all, in the direction of love, in the movement toward this, again, not telos in terms of an end point, but a telos in terms of the direction of God. We can know that. Now you can tell me, oh, this is what's happening to your body. Please tell me about the equipment. But the experience is worth investigating.
Yeah, the point of the equipment and even having it in good order, well functioning, is to have the experience. The experience is the root to the meanings of things. So that's the mechanism. And to just focus on the mechanism, it's like, oh, you want to understand Hemingway's novel, study his typewriter. Our body is the typewriter. Even our brains are the typewriter. Uh, and and the typewriter is there for a function. And all of these wonderful things that we have in our own physiology and neurology and everything is there in order to take in life, reality around us. That's what experience does. And it's not all just within our skin. We're taking in something from outside, and that includes all the elements that make up love, our reaction to one another, friendship, marriage, romance, parenting, being a faithful child of parents, and all of those elements, those are parts of reality, and then the car breaking down and so forth are other parts of reality. But this is the instrument for taking it in, and you want to take in all you can of reality. And that includes the higher reaches of love, and in our view, the divine.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.